Do you want to stay more focused on the right goals in your life, or even just figure out what the right goals are for you? Do you want clarity? Do you want better work-life balance? Well, you're in the right place. Welcome to Success Through Failure.
Welcome to the Success Through Failure podcast, the show that reveals failure as your path to success. You'll listen to intriguing interviews with some of the most successful people on the planet and learn how their failures became a launchpad for success and how yours can too. Here's your host, former Division I All-American wrestler, former Division I head coach, speaker, and personal coach, Jim Harshaw.
Welcome to another episode of Success Through Failure. Today, I bring you Coach Brian Boland. When I was a Division I All-American athlete, I was hyper-focused and I was able to take consistent action that allowed me to be one of the best in the country at what I did. Well, for years after I was done competing, I just struggled to stay focused on my goals day in and day out. I was easily distracted, so I wasn't able to stay consistent, the kind of consistency that you need to have to achieve goals that are meaningful to you. It was discouraging for me. I felt like I was just slipping kind of into mediocrity. Then, after interviewing some of the highest performers in the world, Olympians, CEOs, billionaires, best-selling authors, I discovered how they do it. I discovered 18 powerful and sometimes weird tactics that they use to stay focused at work, focused on the right things while also living a balanced life. And if you start using probably just 3 of these today, you're going to get more done in the next 8 hours. I promise. This is not tomorrow, not next week. These will work today. I guarantee it. It's like magic, but they're real world solutions to it people like you and me want. The ability to stay focused, avoid distraction, and be consistent. I use at least 4 of them every day and have used all of them at some point. And now I'm able to stay focused while I'm at work and get probably 50 to 100% more done each day. I'm more present when I'm home with my wife and 4 kids. And the result is I have a stronger relationship with my family. And I'm still able to achieve incredible goals like being selected to give a TEDx talk at one of the biggest TED events in the world, like launching a podcast and talking to A-list guests and running a half marathon, all of this while having a full-time job that includes frequent travel, working nights and weekends, and all that good stuff. So you're going to find solutions on this list that are going to surprise you. Grab your copy of the 18 Tactics to Staying Focused at Work. Just go to jimharshawjr.com/focus. That's jimharshawjr.com/focus. Coach Boland is the USTA Player Development Head of Men's Tennis. He accepted the position in 2017 after being the head coach of the University of Virginia men's tennis team, where his teams won 4 of the last 5 NCAA Championships. Boland's Virginia team held a 140-match winning streak against ACC opponents, which spanned from 2006 to 2016. This streak is the longest winning streak by any sport in ACC history. If you don't have time to listen to the entire episode, as usual, if you hear something you like but you don't have time to write it down, make sure you grab your free copy of the action plan. Just go to jimharshawjr.com/action. Brian, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Jim. How are you doing?
I'm great. It's good to connect with you again. You and I first crossed paths when I was the assistant wrestling coach at UVA, and you had just been hired. Our offices were right beside each other, and you took over the program, and things quickly changed. But before we get into that, Brian, can you just give the listener a quick background, kind of 30,000-foot view of your background, where you grew up, and kind of how you found your way into tennis and coaching?
Sure. I grew up actually in the Great White North of St. Cloud, Minnesota, which is in central Minnesota. And there were 3 siblings. I have a younger brother, an older brother, and an older sister. And then my parents moved us to St. Cloud, and that's where we spent our childhood, going to school and playing a number of sports. For all 4 of us, we were extremely active as young kids. And then moving on to the university level, where again we continued as a family. We're very involved in sports, and everybody attended school at the collegiate level and played collegiate sports. And then obviously I took the time after university to explore what I wanted to do, and ended up being the head coach at Indiana State for 5 years, and Virginia the past 16 until I became head of player development for men's tennis. So that's in a quick snapshot, but being down now in sunny Florida, living in Windermere, which is right outside of Orlando, has been a drastic change from where I started in St. Cloud, Minnesota. So,
yeah,
big changes, but that's part of it all.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, Brian, you and I crossed paths a long time ago, seems like. And I was the assistant coach, wrestling coach, and you were the head men's tennis coach. And by the way, for the listener, my world is wrestling, right? And in the wrestling world, Cael Sanderson has won, I don't even know, 5 national championships, I think it is, with Penn State. Well, Brian is the Cael Sanderson for any wrestling people listening, the Cael Sanderson of tennis, and now you've moved on to the USTA. But I want to talk about that moment when you set foot on grounds at UVA. Because for the listener, we don't call it a campus, we call it grounds because we have to be different. But you showed up and the program was average at best, right? And you had the courage to have a vision for this program that most others couldn't even fathom. And can you tell us about that and how you had the courage to have that vision?
Well, I think it started when I was a young coach building a blueprint for the program at Indiana State University, where I believe it's what you make of the opportunity. So oftentimes people ask me, how good a position is. And my answer is almost always, well, it's what you do with it. So I looked at Indiana State and looked at the strengths. And in every organization or situation, university, wherever you decide to locate, every place has strengths and weaknesses. And so does everybody that you work with. So for me, it's all about really understanding where it is you're working, what is going to allow you to have the most success, and to try to focus as much as you can on the strengths of the person or the university and everything that surrounds you, and then neutralize everything else to use those strengths as much as possible. So really, that was my thought process when I started at Indiana State University, and I think that same foundation I brought with me to Virginia. And with that, as you know, it always comes down to who you surround yourself with. It's about people, and it's about investing in people, making sure that they understand what role they play in an organization. You put them in the right seats on the bus where they can maximize their strengths, and you provide them plans, a strategy and accountability, and then you allow them to use those strengths and gifts and to maximize them. And, I think that would be what I did at Indiana State and be no different at Virginia. Obviously, 2 extremely different institutions that have a number of different strengths and weaknesses between the 2 of them, but in both cases, I felt like we did a pretty good job maximizing the situation.
You talk about maximizing talent. You talk about getting the right people on the bus. We've all heard that before, but what does that mean? Like, how did you do that, right? And when it got down to the nuts and bolts, getting the right people on the bus. I mean, how did you figure out who the right people were and putting them in the right place?
Well, I think first and foremost, as I said, you have to understand where you are and what it takes to succeed at a particular place. So I looked at, for example, what the history of Indiana State University was and where the success, lied and who are the people that really maximized the opportunities. So I would take time to interview them and ask them, what if you were in my position, what are some of the things that you would focus on? Why were you successful? What are the biggest challenges? And just learn as much as you can about the culture that exists in that particular organization, who are the superstars in the business, and what is it that allows them to be successful. So as much as I think we often focus on, well, this is tennis, so I'm going to go to a tennis coach, in Miami or Florida, University of Florida or somewhere else, you really focus on the culture that exists at the particular institution. Who are the people that that can help you be successful, and what is it that allowed them to be successful. And what you find is, whether it's basketball, football, tennis, wrestling, there's a lot of similarities between what allows you to succeed at one place versus another. And as I said, then you take it from there, where you start to look at, okay, who are the people that are in place that can help me, and how can I get the most out of them? So I think the best way to get the most out of others is you got to find out what you can do to help them first. So instead of going to them and saying, this is what I need, you need to go to them and say, what do you need? How can I make your occupation, your life better, more fulfilling, et cetera? And I think once you ask enough questions, usually you find the answers. And so that's what I try to do, is start internally, build an internal team, listen and learn, figure out who the people are that are interested, have the time, are assigned to, and what makes them tick, and how you first can help them. And then eventually they want to do anything and everything they can to help you. And then obviously you have to start reaching out and doing some recruiting and figuring out who are the candidates out there that will fit into the kind of culture and puzzle that you want to put together. And as much as we say, well, it's just about finding the best player, there's so many factors that go into that, again, based on how you understand the institution, what are the variables, who would fit in, who doesn't, and why. And I think it's just it's a lot of creative thinking, including thinking outside the box, planning, the kind of brainstorming, and then the planning, and then eventually taking action with a collective group of people that are all in it together.
Can you talk a little bit about that creative thinking? And I do want to, before you do that, I want to share one quick story that really I really remember from whenever I first met you, back when the program was, you had just taken over, and you had a young child. I think it was your first, maybe second child. And I remember you telling me, talking about how busy it was, and I hadn't had kids yet. But you were talking about just how busy it was, and how you spend so much time recruiting and all the things you're trying to do to build the program. I remember one of the things you said was you had a clipboard that you carried around. You just kept handy at your house, and you had note cards on it where you could just write a quick handwritten note to recruits quickly and easily. Even if you had just 3 minutes or 2 minutes of spare time, you could actually use that time. So you were creatively finding and manufacturing time, finding ways to get things done where other people might just say, yeah, I don't have time, right? But what other, how do you approach that? You talk about creative thinking, you talk about thinking outside the box. I think most people just limit themselves a little bit. I think they limit what they think is possible based on their current status and based on prior history. But how do you break out of that kind of thinking?
Well, and I think that's something that is really important to understand. Kind of the way that I think to lead is you have to understand where you are. And therefore you can, instead of just focusing on, well, I'm going to do exactly what they do. It's different at one place than it is somewhere else. And so you have to figure out what works at a particular business or organization that you're in. And you're right. One of the things I've always believed is, in order to think critically and creatively and outside the box, you're going to have to step outside the forest a little bit and allow yourself to think freely. And some of the best ideas that I've ever had as it pertained to where I was out for a walk, jogging, occasionally just going and fishing by myself, in the shower, as crazy as that sounds. So there's a lot of places, and oftentimes you'll see me, which I know there's probably those that have lived near me over the years. I will literally stop and start writing things down or taking a note in the most bizarre places, just simply because when I'm away from it all, that's when most of my best ideas come to shape. So a lot of times when I would use my summers to evaluate, regardless of our record or where we finished, the kind of evaluating the entire program, I would have to get myself in the right place with a clear mind, whether that was up in northern Minnesota looking off a lake. And so I was one of those guys that most of my best ideas and outside the box thoughts came when I was away from it all, and I could see the big picture. I could see the whole forest, because sometimes when you're inside of it, you get so caught up in the day-to-day activity that it's impossible to see it and see it all and understand the big picture. So, yeah. And it's also interesting. One of the things that I believe is that you can learn from everybody. I mean, I have 4 young children who I feel, Brianna is 17, Bryce is 16, Brendan is 13, and Brooke is 11. And then, of course, my lovely wife, Becky, who all of them I learn something from every single day, which oftentimes allows me to connect the dot to how that can help me with guys on my team or people within the business. So I'm a huge believer that when you have an opportunity to listen and learn from people, there's always an opportunity. There's always an opportunity to learn and see how that might apply to what you're doing and why. And I think that's sometimes that we forget. It doesn't have to always be somebody that is doing exactly what you think is needed to give you a great idea. For example, I would have staff meetings once a week at UVA, and it started out with probably 3 of us. And by the time I left UVA, there were probably a dozen people in the room every Tuesday morning at 6:30 a.m. And some of my greatest coaching ideas, came from the academic advisor or somebody in facilities, or it was our sports psychologist. And I can go on. And it was really just sharing thoughts and ideas with a bunch of ambitious, smart people who care deeply about the kids in the program. And they would give me incredible ideas as to how to get across to a young man and how to kind of put certain plans together to execute some of those things. And it was amazing. So I think when you're part of a business, an organization, you'd be surprised how many people you can learn with. And then as well as going home, I mean, I'll be honest, probably one of my greatest coaches is my own wife. I mean, she's smart. She has a doctorate degree. She's really pays attention. And she knows what's going on. So she's always been a huge asset in bouncing ideas off of her, whether we're out for a walk or whether we're watching kids play a game or whatever it may be. So, look, I mean, there's always a chance to learn. I've always been a believer that you either are in everything that you say and do, you're either getting better or worse because you never stay the same. So when people say it's not like I got worse, I used to be a championship coach. And my response to that would be, well, you might have. You might have gotten worse, because it's really a constant desire and ambition to learn and surround yourself with people that really are positive, optimistic, and are interesting and want what's best. So it's a constant journey of growth.
You had a lot of success, obviously, in your tenure at Virginia, and I want to read just one paragraph excerpt from an article and this article was written about your being brought over to the Darden School of Business. So for the listener, Darden School is the graduate school of business at the University of Virginia. It's one of the top MBA programs in the world. And one of the professors brought you over, and in this article says, Boland shares his own epiphany with the class. He faults himself for, early in his tenure, focusing players too much on winning instead of on the intrinsic rewards of mastering the craft and playing for a greater purpose. And then it quotes you, Brian, saying, I think we would have won 6 or 7 national championships if I had learned this 10 years ago, and I think I would have been a lot happier. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, for sure. And that's probably, if I look back, I believe one of the things that we all, and that really is a good transition to what we were just talking about, the continued desire to learn and grow and be open-minded and always looking for ways to improve regardless of the results. So for years, and that includes starting at Indiana State, we had some great results and top 20 teams, and then eventually top 10 teams, and then almost consistently for record-breaking years in the quarterfinals or the Final Four, the finals. And we just had a hard time breaking through. But when you're finishing seasons and you're almost consistently in the top 5, it gets harder and harder to change. But with that said, there's a long ways between being in the Final Four and winning the final point. I mean, I think people don't understand. It seems so close, but yet it's so far. And so I think the pain of really losing, enough times in the final or the Final Four, it really allowed me to look deep inside of myself and try to become a better leader. First, a better leader of myself, which I think is something that we all need to do on an ongoing basis, and then certainly learn to lead, the people that work for you, being the players or others that were supportive, learning to work with your peers and lead your peers, and then finally learning to get the most out of people that you work for, and making sure that you're leading them in the right way. And they're all different styles of leadership. So I spent a lot of time after the 2012 national championship loss, which I think was probably our 8th or 9th straight run to the Final Four. Maybe we had 1 or 2 quarterfinals in there and then a couple of national championships that got away, really evaluating myself and how I can become a better leader and more effective. And what I came to the conclusion of is my players were simply too extrinsically focused. And what I mean by that is they were focused on a lot of the outcome of situations, a lot of external factors that interfered with why they did what they did and what was important. And they had the proper perspective to be at peace and free enough to compete at the highest level when it mattered the most. And so I spent a lot of time being honest with myself as to how is it that I can unlock these players, and how can I provide them a better peace of mind so that they can use their great gifts. Well, it started with myself. How can I have a better peace of mind? And the only way you're going to do that is to really decide why you do what you do. And I know that's been said a number of times, but it's actually not just saying it, but really meaning it. And so I came up with a saying that I painted all over the locker rooms and everywhere I could go. It said, simply to make the world a better place to live through tennis. And that became a real obsessive focus of mine. And so I started to be more open, share ideas, listen better. I believed I became a better, more honest leader of myself, rather than saying, I'm not nervous. Well, everybody has fear. Everybody has, anxiety. Everybody, has all kinds of worries and concerns. Coaches sometimes are the worst. And so it's not whether you have those things, it's how you manage them. And to think that we're not all human, and making sure that the players understand that you do indeed understand their feelings, and how is it that you're going to create a peace of mind for yourself. And truthfully, over time, I think that really allowed me to embrace the process. And we talk about the process, but do we actually embrace the process? And what I mean by that is, as much as Brian as a coach wanted to do exactly what was needed for the players to embrace the process, in other words, that everybody was accountable for the things that you laid out. There were certainly things that were negotiable, but there were non-negotiable. So, I ended up really making decisions throughout the course of the regular season that were only in the interest of the long term. Whether that meant suspending the number one player in the country, which I did, and did that for a couple of weeks, whether that meant sitting out a player because it was in his best interest long term, that he needed a break due to his health, even though it would hurt the team in terms of wins and losses in the more immediate sense. And when you start to make those bold decisions and the team sees that you're willing to put it out there and take chances, initially that are in the best long-term interest of the overall development of the group, they really start to believe that the process is indeed what you live by, and that your purpose is also very clear because you continually remind them why it is you made a certain decision. And they see that those decisions are extremely hard in the short term. And what that does, I believe, to athletes and others that you lead is that they tend to become, first of all, the process makes them better. Second of all, they start to realize that you can handle the short-term tough decisions for a long-term gain. And eventually they need to understand that you have such a proper perspective on what a process is that you can handle whatever the outcome is because you've embraced the process, so you have no regrets. And with all that comes some clarity and a peace of mind. And when the people that you lead have a peace of mind and they're able to use their strengths because of that, some great things are going to happen. I don't care where it is you work or what you do. Now you've given people a chance to have the freedom and peace of mind to use their incredible gifts. And that's what eventually started to happen within our program and with our players. And it was kind of a step-by-step process where it took me really evaluating where I was at and then taking it through all of those steps to conclude that this was the only chance that we were going to go from a Final Four to clearing the way to finish it. And once we got to that point, I think we won like 4-5. And to be honest, even throughout that process, I was more at peace. When you can feel it, like, you can't fool your players. Like, the people that you lead, they know you can't tell them you're not nervous when you're nervous. And you can't, when they know when something's off. And for me, it was very clear, not only to myself, but to those that I led, that there was a real peace of mind involved throughout this process, and that I had a really deep purpose as to why I did what I did. And I spent a lot of time explaining that to the guys and reminding them of them every chance that I got that, I'm making this decision because does it not help our purpose? And there was not a day that went by that I didn't get a chance to reinforce that.
And we've heard many times on this podcast, and I'm talking to the listener right now, you got to know your purpose. You got to know your why. And you don't figure that out while you're listening to a podcast on the treadmill or on your commute to or from work. It takes time. It takes time in silence. It takes time talking to other people. It takes time to truly figure this out. And that doesn't happen just while you're listening to a podcast. That's something you have to actually set aside time. And Brian, the listeners heard this before, but this is something I call a productive pause. You talked about the clarity of action or talked about the peace of mind, right? And clarity of action. But, a productive pause is a short period of focused reflection around specific questions that leads to clarity of action and peace of mind. And that's what Brian's talking about doing, for the listener. Again, he's talking about letting go of the now, letting go of the outcome, focusing on the long term, focusing on the process, and making bold decisions, sitting the number one player, and making decisions that are not compromising the long term plan for the short term success. And for the listener, I recommend hitting the rewind button on your podcast right now and going back and re-listen to the last 4 or 5 minutes, because we're talking to somebody who's actually done this and lived it out and has reaped the rewards. This is a coach who was coaching a national powerhouse program, a Final Four program, year in, year out, and made some big, bold decisions to do things a little bit differently, which led him to the breakthroughs in multiple national championships. Brian, can you talk about some of those failures? Can you talk about a time and bring us as close as you can to a moment where you had failed and maybe you were in a dark place and you thought, can I do this? Can I get over the hump? Can I win the national championship? Was there any doubt there? And if so, can you talk about how you handled that?
Well, I think too, like, one of the things that I would tell your listeners is that, first of all, failure to me is not giving yourself a chance and putting yourself in the arena. I tell people all the time that you kind of have three choices. You can freeze, you can flee, or you can fight in extremely adverse situations. And as long as you fight with the best intentions and you do things the right way, as you've never failed. And so we oftentimes look at, coaches or people that did extraordinary things over the years. I mean, look at Dan Marino. What a great quarterback he was, and how he never was part of a Super Bowl championship. Or sure. Marv Levy, who brought his team to 4 Super Bowl championships as a coach and was 0 for 4. Does that mean that he wasn't great at what he did? Absolutely not. I mean, and I think what's extraordinary about those type of people is they're not afraid to put themselves out there. They're not afraid to have the best team. To give themselves the best chance and to let the world know that they gave everything that they could and they came up short time and time and time again. To me, that's not really failure. So I try to pride myself on that. But what I do think failure is a lack of preparation, a lack of intentional preparation, to know and to let those around you know that you've done everything that you could. And then I think also part of that process is to make sure that you're always learning. I think if you're not open-minded and you're learning from those around you, to me, that's a failure in itself. And that's something that will really have you miss out on some incredible opportunities as a leader that wants to have influence. I could give you a number of examples, but let
me jump in real quick, Brian, because you said the failure is the lack of preparation. And I would imagine if we talked to the Brian Boland who hadn't won a national championship yet and said, you just haven't prepared, you would have said, well, I'm working really hard. And a lot of listeners are saying, well, I'm working really hard, right? But it was a matter of you still had other prepreration that maybe you didn't even know that you had to do. Am I right? I mean, you were working really hard.
I think in that case, it came down to really being open-minded, that despite the fact that you're right there, you're in the Final Four or the final, that there's so much more to learn. And with that comes in a willingness to take the risk to adjust and to adapt to get better all the time. And that's scary because when let's say that you're running an organization that's, top 5 every year in the country. And if you're okay with that, that's fine. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to be the best in the country, if you want to, and you believe by being your best, that you can ultimately be the best in the world at what you do, because that's the potential you have, which oftentimes we do. You have to continue to adapt and adjust. And if you look at society today, how much it's changed. I mean, when I started coaching, it's almost 25 years ago. We had landlines. We'd pick up. We'd call the recruit on the phone once a week. We would handwrite letters. Technology has changed everything. Social media has changed everything. Now we're dealing with young people that in an instant they get gratification. It's a whole new world as a coach. So if you haven't been able to adapt and adjust through those changes, it's going to be hard to be successful, because you're not really going to be living in the world in which we do today. I mean, look at the average teenager that spends 8-9 hours a day on some form of social media or technology. That's, if you backed up, 20, 25 years ago, when a coach was in Europe coaching a player and he got a result, well, nobody knew until a couple days later or whenever it may be. And nowadays, people know everything, regardless of where you are. So, the pressure that young people feel today is so different, so drastically different than the pressure that they felt 25 years ago. It doesn't mean there wasn't pressure. It's just so drastically different. And people are so much more impatient, most likely today. They don't want to put the time that it may take to do certain things that in years past have changed. The game has changed. They take tennis. It's become so much more physical. So in the past, you would spend most of your time focusing on the number of hours that you would spend training on the court to get the repetitions. Well, now, if you don't do the things that are necessary to prepare to practice, and then you aren't able to warm down properly, you're not able to stay up with the technology and opportunities that are involved in the gym, you're not involved in understanding how to use video and analytics. There are so many variables to become great, and you need to try to understand that all of those developmental tools need to be balanced out in order to be the best you can be. I always look at it this way. I actually wrote this. I have a developmental tree, and basically it has all the areas of development on there, and everything that you could ever utilize to be a great athlete in tennis. And if you don't take care of every branch, eventually one side of the tree is going to take from the other, because you're not going to water it.
Is that a document, something you could share?
It's something I have, yeah.
Is that something to share publicly?
I did it on my own. I'd be happy to share, yeah.
Okay.
I'd have to give it to you. I did it for myself so I can understand the relevance of every branch. And if you don't take care of the entire tree, then some branches steal from others, and you don't have the proper balance. And therefore, all these things today that we focus on: nutrition, sleep, preparation, how we use the gym, why, and how it works for different athletes. I mean, there's so much involved, and it takes such an attention to detail, an enormous amount of discipline. That's what it's going to take to be great. You know, I love Tony Bennett's line. Tony, who's obviously coaching the number one program in the country now at the University of Virginia basketball team, is a good friend. He always says discipline leads to freedom. And I think that is one of the greatest quotes ever. I would agree with that in all aspects of leadership, of life. You will have, if you can create discipline and make sure that you're really attending to the areas that are going to allow you to be your best. I'll tell you what, like, you feel good, you have more peace, and you can play freely regardless of the outcome. So, but in terms of failures, I'm probably going to fail a couple of times today, Jim, and then tomorrow. I did yesterday at times, but it's really how do you manage those?
Yeah. So can you tell us about a time? Maybe take us to one of the national championships or the Final Fours where you failed, and sort of how that felt, and then maybe share the flip side. You know, how it felt to finally get to the top of the mountain.
Sure. Well, let me back up to. I would date it back to some of the decisions that I made. For example, to create a culture of discipline in my program, perhaps back in 2006, 2007, et cetera, in terms of some of the short-sighted decisions I made to play a certain player. I'm not going to give names, but I had particular players that really were not doing what was necessary to be their best, to make the team the best it could be, to really buy into the necessary discipline that we needed to be the very, very best. And I was too short-sighted. I didn't manage my competitiveness as well as a young coach as I did as I gained experience and went through a lot of the tough times. And it's great to be competitive. And we want people to be competitive, but you have to be able to manage it and keep it all in perspective. So I think a lot of the decisions were just short-sighted in terms of playing guys that really, in the end, should not have probably played that week, whether that was for health reasons or that was for disciplinary reasons. And a lot of times, I'm talking to really reach deep into that. Is it in the best interest for this player? Is he gonna have enough time to be great when we need him to peak at the end of the season? If I don't find 2 or 3 weeks to work on these specific areas of focus that are needed for this person to be his best for the team in May. And now it's February. Well, where are you going to find 2 to 3 weeks in season? Well, what I would tell a coach is there's no compromise on that. You find it. You have to deal with the short-term possibility that you're going to take some bumps and be punched to the ground in order to be really great at the end. And what that would also do is it made those that were on the team realize that you thought they could move up and take on a bigger responsibility on the court. So they would play higher in the lineup. Guys that maybe didn't play would be able to play, get more playing time. And those are sacrifices that are short-term for long-term gain. And most people are afraid to do that. But once you do that, it not only frees you up, but it frees your team up because they're absolutely convinced that their leader understands and believes in the process. So you start believing in the guys that don't play that much, that they're getting more playing time. And then the guys that need to really focus on those areas of focus to get better, they really believe that, wow, this guy really understands that for me to be great, I need to take a week off, or I need to step away, or I need to work on certain things in my life or game to be the best I could be for this team in May. And that's a really painful thing to do for someone that's really, really competitive, which I think most people that are coaching at a high level or leading at a high level, it's so easy to be short-sighted. You're so focused on what something will do for you now, just little things too. Like, you would have a player, and it's a lot harder to take an extremely talented player that plays at the high end of your lineup and hold them accountable because it's going to create conflict, which conflict is really, really good because it brings out the most in yourself and others. As long as it's managed well. But if we just, as coaches and leaders, avoid conflict, we avoid dealing with what is needed, and we just focus on what is easy or what is wanted, we don't solve a lot of real deep-rooted issues that is going to allow us to be our best.
Yeah, and those are really hard things to do, and those are relevant for whether you're a coach, whether you're a leader, whether you're a parent, whether you're an individual just trying to pass up the donut and eat the right thing. It's making those short-term, those small decisions that lead to ultimate success. And
Sure.
And I know, Brian, that those were some tough failures that you endured, but man, the lessons that were forged through that brought a lot of success, and you know, I know you continue to focus on the process, and you're doing great things with USTA.
I think one specific example that comes to mind more recently is we were playing, I think it was in 2015, and we wanted to obviously win the ACC title. I think we had something like 12 or 13 in a row, and we were playing Wake Forest. And I had an opportunity to play a guy that played 3 and 4 in our lineup, but he had only been able to practice for a week, but the doctor cleared him, and he would have certainly backed everybody up. But I told the team, we're focused on the end of the year. He's not ready to play, even though he will help us immediately. I think he's going to help us more if we give him time. We don't want him to lose his confidence. It may give us an ACC title, but it's not exactly what we'll do our best, but I believe in the guys that we have. We don't want to rush him back. And that's the reason I believe we won the national championship a few weeks later. I don't think we would have won it had I played him. I really do believe that. And so those are the type of decisions that we are going to have to encounter with every day.
And I think beyond that, for the listener, sometimes you're going to have to make those decisions, and you won't see necessarily a clear outcome 2 weeks later. It's just it's the small things that eventually add up. You just have to have faith that following that process, believing in that process is going to get you to where you want to go. Brian, can you share maybe a favorite book or resource that you recommend?
For sure, I can. You mentioned John Gordon, who's a friend of mine, and I think the world of. He wrote the Power of Positive Leadership, which I've used with my own opportunities to continue to learn how to lead. I know he's had a number of other great reads that he's worked on, The Energy Bus, The Carpenter. There's so many that I think John has written and really provided some fantastic information on leadership and growth that I think all the listeners would enjoy. Another author that I love is Todd Gonwer, who wrote the book Lead for God's Sake, which has had an impact on coaches all over this country and world. I've provided that book to my staff here, the national coaching staff at US Tennis. There's no doubt that I think that had an impact on us, and that really gets deep into the purpose. And it's a great story that I think everybody would really enjoy reading. In fact, it was only a few days ago that I handed it out to one of our head of departments here at the home of American tennis. So those are two that I think are just tremendous. And of course, there's so much great information out there, both in terms of on the internet and things you can look up. And there's so much opportunity to learn and access to things these days. But reading and finding the right books, people that some of those they stick with you forever. And those are two people that have had massive influence on my thought process with leadership.
And for the listener, I interviewed John Gordon. That's episode 117. If you want to check that one out, episode number 117. And Todd Gonwer, I actually met him when he was in Charlottesville once, and a great book, Lead for God's Sake. So I highly recommend that as well. And I'll have a link to that as well as John Gordon's books in the action plan. That's jimharshawjr.com/action. Brian, thanks so much for making time to come on the show.
Pleasure, Jim. Thanks for having me, and good luck to you with everything.
Likewise.
Appreciate what you do.
Well, likewise for what you do. And for the listener, until next time, take the time to get clear on your goals and embrace failure as a stepping stone on your path to success.